What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am so excited to have my next guest here. She came highly recommended from my last guest, Adam Francisco. So if you haven't seen my talk with Adam, please go and check it out. I'll leave a link down in the description. He's super funny, super chill guy. But I would love to introduce my next guest. She's been doing so much in this social media space that I had to bring her on and talk to her about what she's doing. So without further ado, please welcome Tara Ann. How you doing, Tara?
Hi, very excited to be on your channel. Thank you, Angel.
I'm super excited to have you here and really get your perspective on kind of what's going out. Like I was talking to Adam about this when we spoke. The ability to do the man on the street videos is something that I'm so jealous of, because it's such a interactive experience and you just never know what's going to happen in those situations. So for me, it's something that I admire when I see another creator doing that.
Yes.
So let's start this whole thing. Maybe give us a little backstory of who you are, what got you into politics, I guess your walkaway story. I know the reason that I even have this channel is because I posted a walkaway story. So I feel like there's a new wave of people that are coming into politics due to this walkaway movement. Can you give us a little recap of who you are and how you got started?
Absolutely. My name is Tara Szczepanski, and my channel is called the Polish American Brotherhood. So initially I was focusing on the historical relation between Poland and America when I first initially started the channel, but now it's segued into covering the political arena, of course, with the elections and everything that's going on in the country. Like, how could you not? And then even from like, I've met a lot of Polish people of Polish descent while I've been out here. And so that's the origins of my channel. So before actually with the channel, my father is the one who collaborated with me to begin the channel. And he started posting some political updates and feeds. And I told him, no, let's not go into politics. Like, it's too much of a heated topic. So I would actually take down his post from that and really try to focus on history. Right. But there's history now in the making with what's going on in our present environment. And also at that time, I was very anti-Trump. And so in the last
when you say at that time, what year roughly are you talking about? Are you talking like 2016?
Actually, I am a very fresh walkaway. My 3-month anniversary of being a walkaway will be November 6th.
Wow.
So yeah, so my whole reckoning and come to Jesus moment with really realizing what is going on in the country, how my own values align with that, is how I began to become a Trump supporter and then even move on to being a Trump lover, basically. So I've now been dedicating my channel to promoting Trump and also interviewing people for their perspectives and getting out there and if you told me months ago that I was going to be a Trump supporter, I would call you a liar. So not true. Absolutely not. And so actually how I had come to my realization, I had done my own research, but the reason I even began doing my own research, it all started with a statue. So shortly within the week of the beginning of the George Floyd protests that happened this summer, I posted a defense of a Polish-American war hero, the Kosciuszko statue, which is located in President's Park here in DC. And I made a post defending the statue, giving the history of the statue, and condemning the violence and the riots, and then also equated the use of symbols to what they will then become to represent and know as. And so with that, I said, I see a BLM sign, and since it's vandalizing like this historical hero and somebody that's part of my own culture, I took offense to that. Right. And I said, if you're going to be using signs to be vandalizing the statue, it's not going to be known as anything positive. It's going to take on a meaning of hate and a meaning of, violence. And so I said that when I see a BLM sign, I see the KKK, I see swastika, and I see Hitler. Oh, Lord.
Well, what do you think is causing that, causing the left to really continue to keep going down that road? Because it's almost like the things that happened with the statues, they started to double down from there on, and they were like, well, that's not enough. Now we need to loot. Now we need to light things on fire. What do you think their motivation is behind that? Do you think it is this like kind of disdain, or do you think that maybe they are trying to do something good, but they're just coming off across as, I don't know, for lack of a better word, ignorant?
I think the initial movement started off as a very good movement, and it caught wind so fast because everybody can relate to in a sense, oppression, because like we were all in quarantine, everything was shut down at that moment. And you see a civilian who is killed by a person who is an authoritative figure. And so a trust factor that is in the authority, that is in the government. And so I feel that everybody, in a sense, was able to relate to that and then realize that there is a problem that's going on in the country, or, you know, based on what perspective that you have on that situation. But I think everybody was able to relate to that situation. However, when I saw the footage, like I thought it was a horrible situation, but I've never felt oppressed in my life. Even though I'm mixed Polish and Filipino, my father is a Polish refugee, and my mother is an immigrant from a third world developing nation. Like, we've been able to advance our family from my father seeing an image of America saying, I want to go there because it looks like they have food, to me now having even a successful career and highly educated. I have a double master's. So the American dream is very much real. I feel like if you have a plan and you have the motivation, you can achieve that. So I've never felt oppressed in my life. So was I triggered by this image? I felt bad about it, but it didn't trigger me. I feel the same way it triggered a lot of people. And so hence why my initial post was related to defending history and not, you know, silence is violence or any of the other quotes that I had seen floating around online. And I think that is one of the main triggers that for other people to have backlash onto me, because some of the things I was accused of was valuing a statue, an inanimate object, more than human life, which that's not the case. I was defending history and trying to educate people. And then also I traveled the world, mostly for the last 3 years. I've been to 57 countries. So I understand the swastika to have been a perverted symbol, perverted by Hitler and the Nazis. It was once a symbol of peace, and in the Hindu and Buddhist religion. So when you're in the eastern part of the world in temples, you see that all over the place, and it's not a meaning of hatred.
That was really the only thing that was different. It was just an inverted, it went in the other direction. Yeah.
Yes.
So do you split hairs when it comes to, you mentioned protecting history. Do you see a difference between American history and its known oppression, but obviously the statues and the monuments themselves are more of like a deterrent, saying like, let's not go back there? Do you split hairs between that and the statue that I guess started this whole journey for you, or is that all kind of lumped into the same idea for you?
Well, it's to answer your question, it's in both cases. Okay. I do separate it from the perspective that Kosciuszko was not a slave owner. He was fighting for American freedom. He had studied in France, and so was part of like the French Revolution, like theory and Renaissance of that era. So he had the mentality that everyone should be free and equal. So that's why he was drawn to America as well, to become as an immigrant, to be fighting in the American Revolution. So he was one of the pivotal reasons. He was very close to George Washington, and pivotal reasons why America had also won the war in terms of foreign generals that were there. Right. And then even in his last will and testament, he willed that all of his land that he had been awarded by the American government for his services be sold, and then use the money to be freeing as many slaves as possible. So I do see a difference from that regard versus like maybe a Robert E. Lee statue that had been a general in the Confederacy. However, I am not for pulling down or destroying any statues, because I see them still as a work of art. Right. And to me, art belongs in a museum. If we, as a society, continuously destroy what is considered the arts of previous societies, we'll lose that record, but also like you start from ground zero, which I do feel there are certain individuals in our country who do want to restart history. And then it's like, you know, one civilization then built on top of the other. But in order for that to happen, you have to strip away the art, the fruits of the previous civilizations that were there in order to have that happen. Because when you take away the things that make a person proud, like a national identity or that national pride, it makes them easier mentally to then switch, you know, to a different perspective if they don't have their own form of an identity. Right. So I do believe that statues, no matter who they represent, even of being of Polish descent, I would say an image or sculpture of like Hitler would belong into a museum. And so it can be a collection for anybody to then visit if they want. And that way it's not in people's faces that who do not want to see it, and it represents something else to them. So I'm never for defacing or destroying anything that is part of history.
Right.
And when my father saw all of the monuments being defaced and statues coming down, being a Soviet refugee, his instinct was, wow, it's just like Leningrad all over again.
Wow.
And this is a man who lived through communism and in a socialist, like a full out communist country.
Right.
And socialism and communism has been tried, and it doesn't work.
I think describing it as art is so spot on, because one of the main things that Hitler did was to remove art from Europe, you know, and he had his own kind of segmented, critiqued certain pieces of art that he would allow to be shown, and then everything else was kind of just put away. I do think that that's probably the best representation, because first of all, art is meant to be provocative. It's meant to be offensive. It's meant to be whatever message that you want it to be, but it's also meant to be seen through the context of the society that you're in at the moment, right? Not necessarily as like a mirror looking into the future and then looking back. So I think when we remove statues, when we remove things like that, we're removing the very essence of what art is. And that's why I find it fascinating that the left wants to get rid of these things, because the left is usually more artsy and creative, and they want to do all these explorative things. So I think for me, one of the fundamental pillars of our society has to be keeping accurate portrayals of what things were like at different points in history, so that we either don't go back, or maybe we pull inspiration from the past to bring it forward. But this idea of like erasing history, like you said, it's complete representation of communism and the beginnings of communism. So that's super scary. I'm assuming that as you're discovering all this and you're seeing the monuments get either taken down or vandalized, you're probably now starting to look at Donald Trump's speech about good people on both sides, right? I'm assuming that was a big revelation for you. Can you walk me through that a little bit?
So I feel like one of the common or most used arguments against Donald Trump is to call him a racist or a white supremacist, and whenever that argument comes up, it always is linked to citing as evidence the Charlottesville when he said that there were fine people on both sides. And so literally within the context of the speech he had even given, 40 seconds following that exact quote that's been taken out of context, he says, now I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and white supremacists because they are to be condemned in all situations. What he was actually saying, that there are fine people on both sides, was that either side of the argument, there are good people, because they are well-intentioned people who do feel the same way I do about the preservation of art and statues, and that should not be destroyed.
I love it. Yeah, I think that's one of the fundamental misunderstandings about the Trump presidency as a whole. That became such a, like, I guess, a pillar for the left to stand on and kind of scream from the mountaintops that Trump is a racist, you know? For me, it just goes to show the severity of the censoring and the bias that goes on in the mainstream media. I'm assuming that one of the things we said we were going to talk about, which kind of brings me into this, was Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Barrett now. The kind of critique that she was getting from mainstream media was absurd to me. What was it about the whole ACB journey that I guess spoke to you?
Well, so unfortunately, I'm here in DC. I had originally come for a walkaway event, and I just haven't left, and had decided to stay through the elections. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot going on in the city following that. So I hope to be able to cover that as much as possible on my YouTube channel. But so I did spend 2 days out in front of the courthouse and in front of Capitol Hill to listen to the Democratic leaders. I listened to Chuck Schumer, Senator Bernie Sanders, and Senator Elizabeth Warren. And I also interviewed for my channel individuals who were both protesters against the confirmation, and then also those who were for her confirmation. And so some of the common arguments that the protesters would use is, I would say the number one is that during 2016, when Obama had tried to put forth a justice, it was blocked by the Republicans. And so they like to argue that, well, in an election year, the Republicans wouldn't put through a justice, and now in even a closer proximity to an election, now they're pushing to have the confirmation go through. I think this is a number one misunderstanding, that because it's within the constitutional rights, absolutely, like Trump needs to be doing his job till he was elected, not for 3.5 years, he was elected for a full 4 years. And this is part of his job to be confirming justices as necessary. And the difference between 2016 and 2020 is that the Democrats did not have the vote.
Right.
The Senate is a majority Republican Senate, and in order for a vote to go through and a confirmation to go through, typically the Senate and the president need to be of the same party. Otherwise, you will not have the vote. So in 2016, you had a Republican Senate and you had a Democratic president. The vote would not have gone through. It is completely constitutional and within rights of executing everybody's job, the political leader's job, to be pushing through the nomination and the confirmation. And this is also met with historical precedent. There's been, I believe, 29 times that justices have been confirmed during election years. George Washington confirmed justices. Thomas Jefferson confirmed justices. So this is not a unique situation.
Yeah,
and President Trump was simply doing his job.
The consensus from the left, in my opinion, for the argument that the left is making is, but that's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
I really think
well,
that's what it comes down to.
They feel that it's unfair. It's
right.
Their opinion that it's unfair. And they have absolutely the right to say that it's unfair and be in front of the courthouse screaming that it's unfair. But life's unfair, baby. If it's a right, if it's a law, then it is what it is.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I've usually hear okay arguments coming from the left on certain topics. You know, abortion, at least there's an argument for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's at least some sort of legality that you can cite to. With this, it's really just like kicking and screaming and like taking my ball and going home, because there's nothing legal about them not passing a justice or putting in a justice. It's really just based on the fact that the justice that they're putting in is not somebody that they would approve of, right? And I think there's this idea of trying to change the law to suit whatever their narrative is, depending on what their narrative is and where it's going. And to me, it's one of the most juvenile things that scared me away from the left, because it was always more about like, by any means necessary, we need to get this through, versus like, let's put some trust and some faith in the principles that have been established since the beginning of this country, because it's what's got us to this point. So I think naturally that's what made me more of a conservative, is like, I don't want to just tear institutions down left and right. I would rather just like try and either fix the institutions if they're broken, or put some faith in them because they've gotten us to where we are today. Were there any compelling arguments besides that you heard coming about why we shouldn't pass Justice Amy Coney Barrett?
I feel like that was the most absurd one, the most commonly used one. I feel a lot of the arguments that are put forth by the left are emotionally based as opposed to common sense based or logically based. And I completely agree with you that they want to push through a policy and change the law around it in order to implement that policy without regard to the principles that were set forth by the founding fathers. And our founding fathers were very wise, and there's a reason why America has become exceptional to the world. Right. And when the left likes to claim that America is not exceptional, if that were true, immigration wouldn't be as much of an issue as it is today, because everyone around the world wants to immigrate to the USA. Right. And there's a good reason for that. And so what has made America exceptional is the founding principles that we have. And I think it's a lack of understanding to what those constitutional values are and what is the spirit of those amendments that are there and the reasons that they were put forth. And so when it comes to, in my opinion, I believe the Supreme Court and the judicial branch is the most powerful of our system of checks and balances between the three, because it's the one that is a lifetime appointment. It doesn't sway to the masses. It doesn't go to what's majority and popular of the time. And that's how law should be. You don't want to jump like one day the law is going to be this, the next day the law is going to be that, because we have learned from history that the majority rule is not necessarily what's correct and what is right and what is humane. And so that's the importance of not changing laws as fast as a gust of wind, but having them evolve over time.
Right.
And so I think that's why also like the left is you know, a strategy of them is possibly to be packing the court with adding on further justices in order to have that majority. And with that, of course, the law, the land will be shaped from it.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that the left, their push is always towards one, bigger government, but also two, mob rule. So it's like mob rule for bigger government. And it's an odd contradiction and it's an odd conflation for them because they don't necessarily help each other. You know, when mob rule is taking over, the last thing that you want is bigger government, because then that's how you get a civil war, right? That's how you get the monarchs oppressing the people. And to me, it used to be maybe in 2016 when Donald Trump was first running that I could see maybe a glimpse of this, and you could be called a conspiracy theorist for thinking that America would start to entertain communism. But now looking at it, it's like people more and more are becoming like gun advocates, and like they're like, I'm getting a gun just in case, because there's that imminent threat that at any moment our government's going to cave to this like Marxist worldview, and we're going to have to like fend for ourselves essentially. I think that's scary, but I also think it just shows a fundamental misunderstanding or lack of understanding from people on the left as far as how government works. The idea that like if something doesn't get passed in the Senate, they just have to add more people to the Senate. That's juvenile. You know, it's very odd. And
that's why we see a push with adding on DC
yes.
as a state, as an area, so they can also have additional senators and represented there.
Yeah, and they want to add Puerto Rico as well, which is it's a funny time to be in if you are somebody who's maybe never paid attention to politics and now you're learning. Is like I kind of miss the days where you could just not pay attention to politics and it wouldn't affect your daily life. But now the things that are being advocated for are the things that are going to affect your daily life most, you know, taxes. And, you know, for some people, you know, abortion is a very crucial issue, especially if you're somebody that's like a conservative Christian. That's something that's a hill you want to die on. And so I don't know your opinions on abortion, but do you think, or do you see a connection between this idea of packing the courts and doing all that, having it be somehow about Roe v. Wade and reversing Roe v. Wade? Do you see that connection, or do you think that's kind of like hyperbolic from the right?
I do feel that if the courts are packed to because I see one of the main reasons I had also walked away was when I started becoming more aware of what was going on and my understanding of of government and politics of today, of how it was impacting our lives. In my research for doing that, I saw some extremeness from the left side to, like in Virginia, it being proposed that a baby basically can be born and then a doctor and a mother would then decide whether or not it's going to be considered life if a baby is literally like born there. Make the baby comfortable while they make, you know, a decision about its life. So I think it's too far to be like having an abortion into the third trimester in the form of a convenience, as opposed to like if a woman's life is medically at risk, I think that's completely understandable. Right. Absolutely. But if you see legislation being proposed that's not the scenario.
Right. Well, so, it's what the left does commonly, right? Is they take the exception to the rule or this small part of the rule and they try and make that the rule. They try and make that the general application of everything. And, you know, the first objection you always get if you are somebody that's even vaguely pro-life is like, well, what about rape? Or what about if the mother's life is on the line? It's like, okay, if I say no to that, if I say it's okay to have an abortion at that time, will all of the other abortions be immoral or will they be bad? And their answer is most of the time no, because they're trying to take that rule and apply it to everything. They're trying to make the exception into the rule. So yeah,
that's definitely a common theme. The common theme that I see, not with just the abortion topic, but everything, like with the slogan "Silence is violence," and it's an all or nothing approach that the leftists tend to use, as opposed to recognizing things exist on a spectrum. Right. Like if for example, even with LGBT, if like for me, I'm against somebody who's a biological male playing in women's sports. And so since that's attached to the whole concept of LGBT, should I express that, somebody will say like, you're against gay marriages, when that's the other end of the spectrum, because it's you're completely for it or you're completely against it. And it's a lack of recognition of the spectrum of beliefs that exist.
Yeah, to expand on that topic just a little bit, there's a comedian I watch all the time. He's super funny. His name is Tim Dillon, and he talks about that exact thing. He talks about he's gay as well, but he talks about the fact that a lot of people nowadays are refusing to come out of the closet because they don't want to be political advocates, and all they see from the LGBTQ are, the minute that you come out of the closet, now you have to be this advocate for, the rainbow flag and all this and that, and you have to believe that men can be women and women can be men. And he makes a great point that, like, that's not at all, in his opinion, what being gay is about. It's just about who he's attracted to. It's not really about politics and, gender spectrums and all these things. And I think they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater when it comes to the left, and they're forgetting to just let people live the way liberals in the 60s used to want, and they've just gone to the authoritarian side of things now, and that's it's really intriguing, because it's such a polar opposite from where the left was maybe in the 60s or 70s, where they were fighting, they're freedom fighters, alongside Martin Luther King Jr. So I don't know, it's weird.
Absolutely. Oh, speaking of like different perspectives I had heard was the first time I had heard about abolitionists in the concept of like of abortion and pro-life, that there are individuals who also believe that if a woman has an abortion, that she should be criminalized, she should be thrown in jail. So I interviewed an individual about that, and that was the first time that was educating me on that perspective. I don't share in that perspective of it, but at the same time, like it was good to be educated of the different views and perspectives that do exist out there, because you have it's the important part is coming together with the different views and perspectives. Like one of the things that I do like about the Democratic Party, and I am still a registered Democrat. I voted in the Democratic primaries in Florida, and what I do like about the Democratic Party is that they do represent marginalized voices. But however, now we're seeing it to the extreme that like a small population that still deserves a voice is now becoming the standard across for all individuals. And so then it throws everything out of whack for that. So that's why we have, it's important to have all voices represented, but to come together and not one to dominate the other, and then search for that common ground within critical conversations. But in order to have a critical conversation, each side has to be willing to listen to the other side and also understand from their perspective. And understanding from another person's perspective doesn't mean you agree with them. You just know where they're coming from.
And at the very least, you don't think that they're evil.
Yes. I had never experienced, until becoming a Trump supporter, the how politics is being equated to a person's morality. I had always understood political opinions to be just that: your political opinion, your religious opinion, your cultural opinion, and all have a place, and they're supposed to like come together and then look for the common ground to go forward. Is that what happens in politics? Absolutely not. Is it a future dream that I have that I can, how I see a perfect world to be? Absolutely. But yeah,
no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. When it comes to, I did want to touch on the thing that you said before about abolitionists when it comes to the concept of abortion. I'm a conservative Christian, I'm pro-life, but usually the position that's taken in there, and I know of very few people that will hold the position that a woman who has an abortion will be put in jail or criminalized, right? What most people who are like that far into the pro-life movement advocate for is that the abortionists themselves, or the place where they're performing the abortions, gets criminalized, right? So it's the different it's who gets the responsibility, right? Who gets the accountability for their actions, right? Of course, the woman is going in there, but maybe she's misinformed about her choices. Maybe she doesn't know exactly what her options are. The people who are providing the service should be criminalized more than the people who are taking part in that service, and that's just
absolutely.
For sure. So I do want to talk a little bit more about your journey. So you said once you became a Trump supporter, you started to feel this like the way people were judging you. Did you notice? And this has happened to me personally. People who have known me for years, they know my character. They've hung out with me. They were friends with me. I've gone to their houses and hugged their kids. Like all of a sudden think I'm evil. All of a sudden think like I'm this like nefarious figure. Have you experienced that at all?
100%. So when I had made my post about the Kosciuszko statue and been, people who went to college with me, who were friends with me, said were the ones accusing me of valuing an inanimate object more than a human life.
Right.
And it was out of the visceral hatred that I had received on social media. That's what launched me down the rabbit hole to be doing all the research, because I'm like, wow, did I say something that was that bad? You would think that I was posting to kill people, from what I still look back and see as a a normal post, I guess. I can see how it became like insensitive, because I posted it the week of George Floyd's death. At the same time, like, I have the right to say it, but I shouldn't be accused of murder for it.
Right.
And then so for that extremity, that's what launched me down the rabbit hole of doing my own research. And it took me about 2 months. I kept a diary. I read the news every day. I talked to a lot of people. So when I was talking to my liberal friends about my views, they're like, oh, you're not a Trump supporter. You're just Trump curious. And so that
it's on a spectrum.
yeah. So because it was not about politics. It was all social issues that I first started delving in. I started writing about, and then trying to evaluate myself, because I feel like everybody had gone through their own form of a reckoning, awakening, figuring out their values with the summer protests. And so I No Different had gone through the same. And then so as I was understanding, and I was posting actively my understanding of the social issues and the world, I didn't think I was saying anything that was immoral about it, but I continuously was attacked for my views and my perspectives. And so that, to me, like, I was like, okay, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with what I'm saying, but why am I being accused of immorality for the way I'm saying? Because I never viewed others that way. And when I was on the liberal side of arguments, I was never attacked by the conservative side. I have a lot of conservative friends, and we do talk politics, and they had always said about me that I had always listened to them, and they had always listened to me, but there was never any form of attack until this summer. And then that's when I realized, like, oh, I'm saying things that are outside of this narrative that has been formed by the liberals, and it's like an instant trigger to shut down and just do an ad hominem attack.
Right.
And I think that's why we have a lot of equation to morality, because they're attacking the individual as opposed to the argument.
That's a great point. Wow. Yeah, I never thought about that. The idea that the reason people have delved so deep into morality within politics in these past couple of years is because the left's main tactic is to attack people's morality. So why wouldn't they combat that with saying, well, let's break down what you actually mean by morality? And then that's you start diving into cultural Marxism, and you start diving into, Judeo-Christian worldviews and all these things. That's amazing. See, that's why I do this show, because you learn stuff. That's such a great observation.
Because with that, when you attack a person, you attack their credibility. And if you're able to discredit the person, anything they say will already be out. If you make the person be known as crazy, as a white nationalist, or like when I started listening to Candace Owen, for instance, and the first time I posted I posted a video of her on my wall, the first thing that everyone was saying to me is like, don't listen to her, she's a white supremacist. And I'm like, I'm really confused here, because I didn't know that, like, a Black woman could be a white supremacist.
Or like Ben Shapiro can be the Jewish Nazi. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then also with making with expressing my thoughts and my opinions, I was being accused of being racist, of being a neo-Nazi. I'm Polish, and I'm like, and also, like, a white supremacist. I'm mixed Asian. Right. So like, to me, that's all like ridiculous. And then like when I competed in the Miss America system, the first 2 years I was an advocate for promoting racial diversity with a cultural awareness and diversity platform. And so I was advocating, like, for ending racial divides and integration of people and celebrating their individual cultures. So that way, because I do feel it is a lack of understanding that causes fear and those stereotypes. And then because if you only have, you know, an interpretation of a culture or race or, you know, any group of people made by what you see in the media or a small bad experience, you might start to extrapolate that one experience and then group it to everybody. And so I was an advocate for cultural diversity my first couple of years competing in the Miss America system. So, and people who knew that about me, who were I was part of the Asian Student Association at the University of Central Florida when I attended there. So we led a lot of leadership conferences about cultural diversity and ending racism. But people who were there with me were also attacking me now, you know, 10 years later down the line. So I'm like, wait, you knew me, we were working on these projects together, and yet now you're telling me that I'm a racist?
Yeah, you know, it's funny that you talk about your university, because what got me into this a lot was Jordan Peterson and his take on, you know, the universities and the humanities in particular. And it's probably proper that the people who were in those cultural diversity conferences and stuff in college went out into the real world, started implementing it into the real world. And now you're seeing what you're seeing as a result of it, right? This idea of cultural intersectionality, where depending on how many different cultures you are, you're oppressed to a different degree, and therefore your voice means more and is magnified. I do think that it's very appropriate that that's happening, because it just lines up exactly with the reason that all of this stuff is dangerous. You know, when you put, for me as a Christian, that's how I identify most, right? Before I identify as Hispanic, brown, you know, slanted eyed, whatever, big cheeked, I identify as a Christian before that. And so one of the things that I always found fearful when it came to politics was the way they talked about the Black vote and the Latino vote. And I'm like, how do you know how I'm going to vote just because of the skin color that I have, or because of where my parents are from? It has no bearing on what my actual thoughts are. And it's interesting that those things were starting in the universities and are now mainstream and now political, like the center of political news, you know? What else?
I do find, sorry.
What else did you experience in that time? Like those kind of courses? I don't know if you said it was a conference or a course. What was being taught there? What were you guys talking about?
I think that that universities are definitely liberal breeding grounds, basically, and that's when your mind is most susceptible to you know, your thoughts and ideas and how you're forming your views on the world. So it's the perfect place to be implementing ideologies. And when it's coming from your professors, you know, it's coming from trusted individuals, and so it is the perfect like grounds for liberal ideology. When I was organizing the leadership conferences, we didn't talk about like critical race theory and like this form of oppression. We talked about, you know, the importance of celebrating individual identity and cultures. But now that you mention it, I do have a very weird memory before that, when I did hang out and be part of, like, when most of my friends in college were Asian, because I was the president of the Asian Student Association, I was a member of the Filipino Student Association, and then I helped to form the Asian Pacific American Coalition for Orlando, and then I led the leadership conferences for Asian American leaders. And so by default, most of my friends at that period in my life were Asian, versus like before, when I was in high school and middle school, where I was where there were some Asians at our school, but not a lot. I mean, there was a decent diversity. I grew up in Orlando. But I do remember then feeling, when I was only hanging out with other Asians, like the feeling that of feeling people were more racist towards me or towards the group, or feeling not necessarily oppressed, but that people would stereotype us, whether that was in the sense that we were always in a clique or together, but I did have that feeling of people being more racist towards me, when I never really experienced it, regardless if I maybe noticed it or not, would be the argument. But I remember actually feeling that. And then post-college, I never really felt racism or because I mean, people would say stuff to me now and then, but in a sense, like, I never took those kind of comments personal, because they don't know me. It's just a backlash to them. And even when people would use Polish slurs at me, and I would just respond back like, all right, so a Polish slur is Polak, but it's an offensive term. It's labeled as offensive when it's a non-Polish person saying it to a Polish person, but Polish people commonly use it among each other. So I know we all know certain terms exist amongst other cultures that have a similar feel to that.
Right.
But so when someone would say to me like, "Oh, you dumb Polak," I don't know, I just turn to them and say, "I'm smarter than you, and I'm a proud Polak," and go about my day.
Right.
So words never felt to me a form of oppression, because I never let anything like stand in my way. I'm like, okay, it's an angry person, I'm just gonna avoid them or stay away from them. And then, so I never felt like anything was ever like holding me back.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like what we're seeing now, like, oh, you're a brown person or you're a woman, like, so you need to be like protected, or like you're oppressed, so let me do something to uplift you. Now, like, that brings me into like talking about like white privilege and
right.
or the concept of like white privilege, and I feel almost as if like the ideology that some of the more radicalized schools have is teaching this concept of protection for an ethnic group,
right.
or a group of people based on like their skin colors, and they think that they're doing a social justice right, when all that is handicapping.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it's handicapping this group of people, because it's saying that they're not able to handle regular life. Like, you're not being straightforward about stuff, or giving them an advantage to advance them forward without applying the same standard you would across to other people. Like, that's actually like a handicap.
Yeah,
in my
in the
opinion.
hood they call it sunning them, right? Like you're making them feel like they're your son, and like you're treating them like a little pet almost. And I wholeheartedly agree. I think there's an important distinction to be made, and I was having this it was an argument pretty much with one of my best friends yesterday, the difference between racism and being a racist and prejudice, right? Because I think prejudice, everybody has prejudice. I'm prejudging an iPhone before I buy it instead of an Android, prejudging his gray shirt, stuff like that. But I think people are very likely to judge somebody before they know them just based on the experiences of their past. That doesn't necessarily mean that they think they are superior to you because of the color of their skin. So when people ask me all the time, like, you've never experienced racism? You've never experienced it? I'll say, no, I've never experienced somebody telling me that I'm less than them because of the color of my skin. I have experienced prejudice. I have experienced people giving me like awkward looks here and there when I'm wearing like my hat down and I'm going to like a convenience store or something like that. But then I start talking to them and it dissolves, or they get to know me and it dissolves, because they're simply judging based on what they know. Once they know more, then they adapt. And if they adapt, does that mean their racism has vanished? Does it mean it's disintegrated? It's like, no, they were never racist. They just didn't know you enough to judge you accurately, right? They prejudged you. And I think that's the distinction that gets thrown away with all these white privilege arguments, and with all of these like, oppression Olympics classes, that people forget that everybody has some sort of judging mentality towards anything that they're doing in life. And we just have to be able to navigate that according to who we are, regardless of whether you're white or black. Everybody has different cards. And to me, that's one of the reasons that I enjoy voices like yours, because you kind of break that narrative of like, oh, they're a minority, they need my help. It's more so like, I can think for myself, I can do for myself, I know what I want, and it's not only solely because of my nationality or the way that I look.
Correct. And then you brought up an important distinction between racism, discrimination, and prejudice, because like today, from what I'm observing, racism like is being tossed in your face and labeled everywhere. And so this is actually going to, in the long run, do a disservice to acts that are genuinely racist, because it's gonna cause a desensitization of it. Because like if everything's labeled as racist, then it's like, all right, well, I give up. I guess I am.
Right.
But or I guess, you're calling me that, but you know who you are and everything. So like I've seen online on social media posts about like, oh, well, they made me wait a long time to be seated at this restaurant. Like this, don't go to this place, cancel this restaurant because they're racist.
Yeah.
And that was made by
doing racist reviews now. Yeah. Like they're letting you know in advance if that restaurant has been accused of racism. It's absurd. You brought up a great point about discrimination too. because discrimination leads into the whole area of systemic racism, right? This idea that the system of America is built in order to suppress or oppress a certain minority group, and discrimination are the rules that are put in place to stop you simply because of the color of your skin from advancing. And like you said, there's nothing that we can't do in this country that anybody else can if we leverage ourselves the right way, or if we make the right decisions. So I think it's important that we clarify all those things. And like you said, it'll lead us down the road where not only will we be desensitized, but we'll be training kids that are being brought up in this generation that they are being oppressed and they can't do anything because of the system of the United States. And that is probably the most poisonous thing you can do to a young person's mind.
I agree. It teaches them to play the victim and that they are the victim. Like even if you experience a bad situation, like if you don't play into that victimhood, it's about empowering yourself, because you shouldn't allow maybe a 10% bad experience of your world to then cover the other 90% of positive experiences to then shape your view of the world. And if you play the victim, that's when you lack empowerment. Yeah. In any situation I've ever faced in my life, like the world has definitely been unfair. There's everybody has experienced some sort of unfairness in the world. But Lord, if I ever say like this is unfair to my parents, they'd be like, are you crazy? You have food on your table? Like, we didn't have that. Like, so I can't even say the world's not fair in my house, because like I have food, I have a roof over my head, all my basic needs are met. So yeah, life is going to be unfair, but it's about what you're going to do about it. Are you
first generation American?
I am first generation American, yes.
Okay, as am I. I think there's a very specific mindset that people who are first generation American have, because we can see what's going on with, what's been happening in America before we've gotten here. But we can also see the perks of it just coming from somewhere else, inheriting pretty much the idea of Americana and American culture, and then excelling in it, right? Like our parents excelled in it, coming from somewhere else, came here, built an entire life, excelled in it. And now we have people telling us that we're oppressed. And we're like, what are you talking about? Like, my dad didn't speak English for the first 25 years he was in America, and he had a successful business for 50 years. Like there's nothing that can stand in our way, really. And that's where I find the super toxic about the left. It's super pessimistic, it's doom and gloom all the time. And to me, that's just something that's just pushed me so far away. And unlike you, I only made my walkaway video a few months ago, but I've been thinking about these things for a while now, and it's finally like time to just air it all out,
Absolutely.
So I do want to give you a little bit of time, because we are running low a little bit, to plug everything that you got, what's going on in the future for you, just anything that you want to say. Make sure you say your YouTube and your Instagram again, because super entertaining, and just let us have it.
Again, please, everybody, be sure to like and subscribe to Angel's channel, and also check mine out. Check mine out. It's the Polish American Brotherhood. So I'm very new to the scene and looking to grow the channel as well, and then be doing as many interviews in politics and social and the social space to get people's opinions out there of regular individuals. And then to conclude, like my walkaway story, I know I've entered in like tidbits throughout our conversation, but so it was the first 2 months of doing research, and then I started like listening less to CNN and I didn't really watch Fox before, and I still don't really watch Fox that much now. And I just don't really watch CNN unless you have a town hall going on and everything. Right. But I started going directly to like main sources, the White House government press pages. And then with that, I started finding out what is actually happening, what Trump's actually doing. And then I realized I actually like a lot of the policies that he's implemented. And then I started looking at like, what has he done? Because you got to do research for that. Yeah. This president has 95% negative press, that is unprecedented amount of the media. Like if like he's actually done so much. And then that's when I started questioning. I'm like, he's done so much. Why is this never ever being covered? And then I started seeing the differences between comparing what he's actually doing and what he actually says in the full length of press conferences compared to what ends up making it on to the news. I never changed my values and my beliefs from becoming a walkaway. They were always the same. But in researching how the parties themselves have changed, and I was always more in the middle, like now I saw how left things have moved,
Yeah.
and then I see that my views are mostly represented then on the right side of the political spectrum.
Right.
And with that, like that's how I had really my aha moment. And with everybody continuously attacking me, I did get private messages in support and thanking me because they are not in a position where they can be vocal,
Right.
because there are real world ramifications that come about from voicing conservative views. And you lose your job, you lose your clients, you lose your social network, you lose your friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so for their own reasons, they choose to be silent, but they're messaging me then saying thank you for that. And that's how I decided to become vocal in my walkaway story.
I love that. I love that. It's like David Rubin says, I didn't leave the left left me. Right? It's like we had the same values, nothing changed. It's just the Overton window just shifted all the way, and all of a sudden the people who like to, I don't know, get married, have kids, not pay taxes, and buy a house are now the Nazis of society. I don't know. It's wild. But thank you so much for coming on here and just giving me your wisdom. This has been such a great talk. I've learned so much, and I would love to invite you back anytime you want to come on. You know, open
Fantastic,
invitation.
fantastic.
Yeah, and you know, have fun out there in DC. That's my dog barking, and just be safe out there, please, because things are going
Thank
crazy.
you.
So,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
After the elections, I would love to chat with you and tell you firsthand what I see going on in DC. So
Oh yeah, for sure. And make sure you post it on Instagram. I'll share it if you guys follow me on Instagram. I'll share whatever she's doing, so that you know you can be in touch and be a voice on the ground, like Elijah Schaefer, kind of. You know. Um,
thank you.
Thank you. Stick around. I'm gonna stop recording.